The lecture hall of Orlov State University was never quiet, not even in the minutes before Professor Artem Leonov's famous morning lectures. Students buzzed with excitement, flipping through notebooks, adjusting glasses, whispering rumors about what impossible mathematical riddle he might present today. Artem was known for two things: brilliance, and a dramatic flair that made him a campus celebrity. The hall itself felt like an ancient cathedral of knowledge: high ceilings, rows of wooden benches polished by decades of anxious students, and a massive blackboard stretching across the entire width of the front wall. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting golden stripes across the room, illuminating dust that swirled like tiny galaxies. As the clock struck 9, the doors swung open. Professor Leonov strode in like a conductor entering a symphony hall. He wore his signature black vest, crisp white shirt, and a dark red tie that students jokingly called the tie of doom. It meant he had planned something particularly intense. Immediately, the hall erupted in applause. Artem lifted a hand smugly. "Good morning, geniuses," he said, voice smooth and commanding. He placed his leather briefcase on the desk, opened it, and took out a piece of chalk. The students leaned forward as if he were pulling out a treasure. "Today," he announced, "we step into territory no one has crossed in over a century." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Behind them, unnoticed in the far corner, pushing a worn-out mop bucket, stood Mikhail. The janitor. He moved slowly, almost invisibly, as though he didn't want to disturb the academic world around him. His uniform was faded, the knees of his trousers patched. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd known hard labor all their life. Yet, as he worked, he kept glancing at the chalkboard. Professor Artem turned toward the board with theatrical pause and began writing an equation, if it could even be called that. It was a monstrous creation of symbols, integrals, tensors, an impossible fusion of mathematical languages. Students gasped. Some laughed nervously. Phones rose to capture the moment. The chalk squeaked as Artem wrote the final line, an enormous expression looping across the blackboard like a serpent. He stepped back proudly. "This," he said, gesturing dramatically, "is considered unsolvable by every major mathematician of our time. It is a problem so complex that even supercomputers can't break its structure." Students exchanged stunned looks. One whispered, "He's crazy." Then Artem grinned. "So here is my offer," he declared. "If any of you can solve this equation, I'll marry you." The class roared with laughter. Even Artem chuckled at his own joke. But one person didn't laugh. Mikhail, from across the room, froze. The mop in his hands stopped moving. His eyes locked onto the board with an intensity no one else noticed. He stared the way a painter stares at a blank canvas, recognizing something familiar, something calling him. He stepped a little closer. Slowly, almost by instinct, while Artem basked in applause, Mikhail whispered under his breath, barely audible. "That second term, why is it shifted by I?" His lips began moving silently, calculating, rewriting the problem inside his mind. For him, the chaotic equation wasn't chaos at all, it was language. His language, one he hadn't spoken in years. He felt his pulse quicken, memories he'd buried long ago bubbling up. Numbers, chalk, lecture halls, his old life, but he pushed the memories back down. He was a janitor now, a ghost in the halls. Still, he couldn't look away. When the lecture ended, students rushed forward to take pictures with the professor and the board. They swarmed Artem, asking questions, praising him. The air buzzed with excitement. Mikhail waited. He leaned on his mop, heart pounding, fighting with himself. Should I say something? No, it isn't my world anymore. But the math wouldn't let go. It glowed in his mind like a fire he'd spent years trying to extinguish. Finally, when most students had left, he stepped toward the professor. "Excuse me, Professor Leonov," he said softly. Artem glanced over, irritated at being interrupted during his moment of glory. "Yes, the mop closet is down the hall." A couple of remaining students snickered cruelly. Mikhail swallowed. He could walk away. He could pretend he never saw the equation. But he didn't. "The equation," he said quietly, "your shift in the recursive boundary is incorrect. If you adjust that term, the symmetry becomes solvable. And the answer is actually quite simple." Silence. Utter, stunned silence. Artem blinked, annoyed. "My good man, please. You clean floors, not solve paradoxes." But something in Mikhail's eyes made him pause. The janitor stepped toward the chalkboard. "May I?" Artem hesitated. "Do as you like," he scoffed. Mikhail took the chalk. The room went silent. Even the lingering students fell still. He began writing, slowly, carefully, but confidently. His handwriting wasn't the shaky scrawl of a nervous janitor. It was elegant, precise, a mathematician's hand. Line by line, he unraveled the monstrous equation. Every swipe of chalk revealed deeper structure, hidden logic, beauty beneath chaos. Students crept closer, their breaths held. Artem leaned in, eyes wide. Then came the final step. Mikhail circled the result. This, he said softly, is the solution. The chalk fell from his fingers. Professor Artem stepped forward, face draining of color. He scanned the steps, tracing each line with his trembling finger. It was perfect, not only correct, brilliant. He turned to Mikhail slowly. Who are you? Mikhail looked down, eyes heavy with a lifetime of sorrow. Someone who used to solve equations, he whispered. Before life erased that part of me. The hall was silent. The students stared at the janitor with awe, confusion, and disbelief. Even Artem, arrogant, unshakable Artem, stood frozen. Because the man he had dismissed was greater than any of them had imagined. For several long seconds, the lecture hall remained frozen in silence. The students, the chalk dust hanging in the sunbeams, even Professor Leonov himself, all suspended, as though the universe had paused to witness something impossible. Mikhail stood awkwardly beside the blackboard, hands clasped behind him, trying to shrink into the background again. But he couldn't hide, not after what he had just done. Finally, someone whispered, "He solved it." Another added, "The janitor solved the unsolvable problem." The murmurs spread like shockwaves through the hall. Professor Artem Leonov, world-renowned mathematician, recipient of international awards, stood in front of the board with trembling lips. He had built his reputation on his genius, and on the certainty that no one else in the building could match him. But now, a janitor had dismantled his ego in 10 precise lines of chalk. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Mikhail, you said." Mikhail nodded. Artem approached him cautiously, as though afraid the man might vanish if he stepped too close. "This solution," he said, tapping the equation with a fingertip, "is not just correct, it is elegant. Only 3 mathematicians in the world could produce something like this." Mikhail gave a sad half-smile. "4, he corrected quietly. "There used to be 4. Artem frowned. "What do you mean?" Mikhail hesitated. He hadn't spoken about his past in years. It lived inside him like an old scar, always there, but better left alone. But the moment seemed to demand truth. "I was a research mathematician once. A theorist. Worked at the Academy of Sciences. Published a few papers on boundary symmetries and recursive systems." Artem's eyebrows shot up. That's Nobel-level work." "It was," Mikhail admitted softly. "Before my wife fell ill. The treatments were expensive, too expensive. I sold everything, house, equipment, my lab access. When she died," his voice cracked, "the universities didn't wait for me to recover. My position was given to someone younger. Someone who wasn't broken." The room went silent. Students who minutes ago were laughing at him now stared with wide, guilty eyes. Artem swallowed hard. "And you became a janitor." "I needed to feed my son," Mikhail said simply. "I took the first job I could. Cleaning floors pays less than teaching, but at least it pays." A heavy silence pressed on the walls. One girl in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. Artem closed his briefcase with a snap, determination igniting in his expression. "This is unacceptable," he declared. "Your mind, your talent, does not belong to a mop. You should be teaching here, not cleaning here." Mikhail shook his head. "It's been years. My credentials lapsed. My publications are forgotten. I'm too old to start again." "No," Artem said firmly. "You solved something I've been working on for 6 months. You have a mind sharper than anyone in this building, including me." A ripple of astonished gasps filled the hall. Hearing a legendary professor admit such a thing was shocking enough. Hearing him say it to a janitor was unthinkable. But Artem wasn't finished. "Everyone out," he said sharply. Students scrambled toward the exit, whispering frantically about what they'd witnessed. Soon, only Artem and Mikhail remained inside the quiet hall. Artem walked up to him slowly. "What you did today, it rewrites everything. But I need one thing from you." Mikhail tensed. "What is that?" Artem picked up the chalk and placed it gently into Mikhail's hand. "Teach me." Mikhail blinked. "Teach you? But you're a professor," Artem finished. "A good one, but not as good as you." He gestured toward the board. "That boundary shift, you saw it instantly. I didn't." That means there is something in your thinking, something in your experience, that this university desperately needs. A long pause followed. Mikhail stared at the chalk in his hand. It felt warm, alive, like an old friend he was afraid to touch after so many years apart. I'm not a teacher anymore, he whispered. Then become one again, Artem replied. But Mikhail hesitated, not because of fear, but because of responsibility. What about my son? He murmured. He depends on me. This job, as low as it is, keeps him fed. Artem stepped closer, voice steady and sincere. Let me help you. I'll speak to the dean myself. I know your name will open doors once people realize who you are. Mikhail shook his head slowly, unsure. I don't want pity. It isn't pity, Artem said. It's recognition. Before either man could speak further, the lecture hall doors burst open. A tall man in a gray suit strode in, accompanied by a woman with a clipboard. Behind them was a student who must have sprinted across campus, breathless and wide-eyed. Professor Leonov, the woman said, we received an urgent message. Something about a breakthrough. She glanced at Mikhail in confusion. Artem stepped forward immediately. Yes, this man, Mikhail, has just solved the recursion boundary problem. The one listed as unsolvable in our department's global database. The man in the suit nearly dropped his phone. He stared at Mikhail, like he was staring at a living legend. You solved that. Mikhail shifted uncomfortably. I just corrected a misplaced shift. A misplaced, the man stammered. Do you understand that this could lead to entirely new algorithmic models? This is monumental. He turned to the woman. Get the dean, now. The woman dashed out. Artem placed a hand on Mikhail's shoulder. You see, he said quietly, you were never erased. You were simply waiting for the world to find you again. Minutes later, the dean herself arrived, stern, dignified, used to being the smartest person in any room. Until today, she listened to the explanation. She examined the board, she questioned Mikhail, and by the end, her severe expression had melted into stunned admiration. Mikhail, she said, this university would be honored to have you join our mathematics faculty. Not as a janitor, as a professor, effective immediately. The words hit him like a storm. A professor, again, after so many years of sweeping floors, wiping desks, living in the shadows, here was a hand reaching into the darkness and pulling him back into the light. His eyes filled. I don't know what to say. Artem smiled. Say yes. Slowly, Mikhail nodded. Yes. The dean extended her hand. He shook it, his grip trembling. As the faculty members left to prepare the paperwork, Artem turned to him with a warm smile. You've just changed your life, Mikhail. Mikhail looked at the chalk still in his hand. No, he said softly. You did, when you let me touch the board. Artem shook his head. You belong at the board. Always have. They stood side by side, two brilliant minds united by fate, chalk dust, and a single world-changing equation. And in that moment, the janitor who had once lost everything, finally regained the future he thought was gone forever.